It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Scott Hinz, Chief Operating Officer of HINZJJ LLC, a 45 Jimmy John's franchisee based in Kansas City, owned by his wife Sandra and his son Matthew. Scott has also been an active partner with two brothers in Hinz Trucking, a nationwide long-haul flatbed trucking company with 110 power units for over 30 years. Scott is primarily responsible for all store operations in HINZJJ and the sales and dispatch departments at Hinz Trucking. A native of Plymouth, Nebraska, Scott and his wife have been happily married for over 35 years and look forward to many more. And through being an active C12 Group member, Scott continues to learn how HINZJJ and Hinz Trucking can serve a greater purpose by ministering to and growing the faith of their team members. Scott Hinz, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, and good to be here to talk.
Nice to have you here as well, Scott. And we're kind of in interesting times. This will be this will be released a little bit later, but we're kind of into week 2 or 3 of the coronavirus crisis. And I know that's impacted all our families. So I believe we're both broadcasting from home today. I assume you're in your home office, correct?
Yes, I am.
And we're all going to be doing part of that. And let's just pray for everyone, obviously, that's been having health problems, but also those that, are staying safe, and keep them that way. We greatly appreciate that, and hope all of your family and all your staff are doing the same. But let's start talking about you a little bit. We always like to talk about the early years, and tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what your early family life was like, Scott.
I grew up on a farm outside Plymouth, Nebraska, southeast Nebraska, small town. 3 brothers, 1 sister. It's pretty much church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, family devotions most nights after dinner.
Awesome. Yeah, up early working on the farm. Were you doing chores before school?
Yeah, no, not really. We didn't have livestock, so we were just corn, soybean farmers, irrigated farmlands. So more of a summer, the spring, summer, fall, but.
Now, you chose a different direction than farming, but let's talk a little bit about your parents and brothers and sisters. Were mom and dad second, third generation farmers? They come from a long line of farmers of the land?
Yeah, long line of farmers. Yeah. My mother's parents were farmers. Yeah. Not sure how far it went back, but pretty much a long line.
And always in Nebraska, or was mom from a different part of the country?
She was also from Nebraska. Mm-hmm. Small town of Diller, maybe 30 miles from Plymouth.
Right. Dad too?
Yep. Dad grew up on a farm. Well, we actually grew up on the homestead that he was born and raised in. So
got it. Mom and dad, high school sweethearts? Did they know each other, or was
no.
it separate counties, perhaps?
Separate counties. My dad was 26 when they met.
Oh, a little older.
For back then, that was old.
Yeah, that's right.
My mom was 20. Was going to school to be a teacher.
Right.
And she taught school for a few years, and then they became saved maybe a year or 2 after being married through listening to the back of the Bible on the radio. They did not grow up in church homes.
Neither of them did. Interesting.
No, it's just hand of God. Brought them in their lives. To Him, awesome. And through that, most of my dad's brothers and sisters were saved. Most of my mom's family is still still to be saved. But
Right. Right. Brothers and sisters, younger, older, where were you in the mix?
one older brother,
Okay.
two younger brothers, and a younger sister.
And did they stay in farming after growing up, or did they all kind of go their separate ways as well?
Well, that's the story in itself because after I was married, I did farm for 1 year.
Oh, you did? Okay.
It was right during the farming crisis of the 80s.
Oh, my.
My dad also had a implement dealership, and during the farm crisis, the implement dealership went bankrupt.
Oh, boy.
Had used the farm as collateral for the implement dealership, so he ended up declaring bankruptcy, and we had our own trucks at the time and had hauled our own grain to feedlots in Kansas, Oklahoma, Panhandle of Texas.
Right.
Kind of through that, we transitioned to trucking, and that's kind of how we got the trucking business.
Okay, got it. So that was the birth of the Hinz Trucking Company. Interesting.
Right,
Well, we'll get more to that in a minute. And your brothers and sisters are all involved in that business today?
No, I've got two brothers that are. One that has a boat dealership outside of Kansas City. My sister married a farmer, and so their family still farms. But that's all.
So still one farmer in the family.
Yes. Yeah.
When did you come to Christ, and what role did he play in your upbringing, Scott?
I remember it pretty clearly. I was sitting in the back row pew at church, and the pastor mentioned something to the effect of, if you aren't sure, make sure today. So I did. Didn't tell anybody. I was 12. My parents had always told me I had accepted Christ when I was 5, but I couldn't remember it.
Right.
So, and I kind of always felt that way. And then at 12, when I accepted Christ in that back row pew, I really never doubted since then, and can remember it clearly. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Who were some of the other early inspirational people in your life growing up?
Probably through that, definitely wanted to be like Jesus Christ. So I was a pretty strong Christian, middle school, high school. Didn't really fall into some of the traps that some of my friends and young people do. So God was watching out for me on that, but probably my father and seeing his faith. And I enjoyed football, college football, pro football. So living in Nebraska.
That says it all.
Tom Osborne, Tom Landry with the Cowboys, not only their success in the field, but just the way they carried themselves and the kind of men they were, that quieter guys, which I'm quieter. So I just looked up to those two guys, I guess.
Did you go on to play college football?
Nope. Okay. I played. I just worked on the farm. Did not play any sports, even though I enjoyed sports. But
what about your studies? Were you a good student?
I did get good grades, but I was generally a lazy student and didn't study much. I was someone who never left things until the last second. I'd get my work done early, and then I'd go, do off work, play, whatever. But I didn't like the feeling of knowing it was out there. I wanted to get it done, push it out of the way, and then go on. But I remember the principal of our school telling me after graduation that they had never really tapped into my potential, and he hoped someone would in the future. It was like it kind of caught me by surprise. I thought I was doing just fine.
What were some of those outside ventures? You'd mentioned sports. What other things did you pursue or have an interest in? Obviously, I'm sure you were busy at home as well, but what types of other pursuits did you have outside of class?
I really, other than watching college football and pro football and working on the farm, went to youth group, so a lot of different things that involved. But other than that, my parents made me take piano lessons for 7 years, which I did not like, had no talent. I have no musical ability. I have no artistic ability. So it was a little bit like sticking a square peg into a round hole on that.
A round hole, right. What about entrepreneurial things? Did you do any, fundraising events? Was there the ubiquitous paper route, or, selling Christmas cards or anything like that on the farm?
FFA. I was in FFA. So,
FFA.
you had your own projects with that, and But other than that, no, it was mom and dad we worked,
Yeah. Right.
That was,
It was farm life.
yeah, they instilled a work ethic in us, and that's what we did.
What were some of the jobs that you used to do, both either at the farm or as you got older and maybe during summers and, outside the farm?
I can remember driving a tractor when I was 8 years old. Maybe 10.
Didn't need a license then, I guess.
No. Driving a pickup down the, gravel country roads when I was 9, 10 years old, following dad behind a tractor and moving equipment from field to field and laying pipe. We had gravity flow irrigation, disking, planting, harvesting, drove truck, pretty much anything, cultivating.
Yeah.
But summers were pretty much irrigating and a lot of laying pipe, picking up pipe, checking fields, things like that. So.
Right. Well, you went on to college, and did mom and dad have a degree? You mentioned your mother was a teacher, so did she have a bachelor's degree, or dad go to college?
Some kind of degree of some kind she could teach. I think the rules were much
Teacher
more
certificate,
relaxed
yeah.
back then.
Right.
I think maybe
was it kind of a foregone conclusion that you'd go to college?
Not really. No.
Yeah.
It was whatever you want to do. Do you want to stay and farm? Do you want to go to college? Do you want to go to college, come back to the farm? Kind of whatever.
Yeah.
I think at that time I thought I did want to leave the farm. I went to Grace College of the Bible in Omaha for a year.
Right.
That's where I met my wife, but I was kind of at that time not really knowing what I wanted to do, and even had thoughts of becoming a pastor, but I don't think that's what God had in store for me, and I don't think I would have been a very good one. So it worked out.
So you got married at Grace, or met your wife there at Grace?
Met my wife at Grace. We got married about a year after we met. Got engaged about 6 months after we met. We were married at 19, so naive and and looking back on it, probably kind of stupid, but it worked out. We've been married for 35 years plus.
Congratulations. So, How many kids?
One boy, son. He is 31 now.
Right.
32. So
yeah. And did you come right into the family business then when you came back from Grace, or what was your
We did. We farmed.
Trajectory?
Decided I was going to farm, and I kind of, at college, I had a job. Found out pretty quickly I didn't like working for someone else.
Right.
So, the easiest way to not work for someone else was farming. So went back to the farm after we were married, and we farmed for a year, and that's kind of when the whole thing collapsed and we transitioned to trucking. So
trucking, yeah. So you were right there with Dad, and your brothers were working in the business as well at that time, or working on the farm?
My older brother was, and and my dad, my youngest. The younger brother that's now in the trucking business, Todd, senior in high school, he had planned to go to Northwestern in Minneapolis for college, but harvest time of his senior year, he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease. So he had a pretty good lengthy time with chemo and all that. Did come out of that okay.
Recovered.
Yeah. Good. So he's been cleared for 30 years now. So, but
that's awesome. Well, tell me about that transition from farming to trucking, because that must have been, I can imagine somewhat of a fearful time, right? Dad was probably in his 40s or 50s, and, never expected that to happen. And, it's difficult, and I think probably somewhat embarrassing to have to go through bankruptcy and through all of that. How did the family stick together during those times?
During that time, my brother and older brother Rod and I, we had started to plan to stay in farming, and Dad was going to restart in trucking. Right. So we started talking to lenders and working things out. And, I was a 20-year-old kid, newly married. My older brother Rod was 23. So, we didn't exactly know what we were doing.
Yeah, you were kids, Scott.
So then we started to see, looking at the numbers and everything in the trucking business, that maybe, that was more financially lucrative in the long term. Farming had
What led you to that? I mean, it sounded like you had some trucks on the farm.
My father had a truck with the implement dealership, hauled their own equipment. And then on the farm, we had 5 or 6 semis that instead of selling our grain locally, we would sell it to feedlots in southwest Kansas, western Oklahoma, and the panhandle of Texas. So in the winter, a lot of times we would haul our grain down there, just back and forth. So if we were out of school for a week, I'm not sure it was entirely legal, but I was a 17, 18-year-old kid driving a semi down the highway to southwest Kansas and making a 500-mile round trip. And so, but kind of through that and seeing how that business all worked, that's kind of what led to moving in that direction.
You got into the trucking business, obviously doing it first on your own on the farm, but then you decided to begin doing it for other people. So did folks approach you with regards to, carrying loads and, kind of saw that you and your brother were doing that? Or how did you kind of get into so this is something we can go and charge others to do for them?
Yeah, we would do some of that on the farm, haul our grain down to those areas, and then maybe a backhaul of wheat back up to Abilene, Kansas. So
you don't go back empty.
So kind of through that, we were already doing a little of that, a little bit for other farmers, the equipment, machinery hauling. So a little bit of everything. And then just made that decision to a little less investment than farming. So
got it. And did you then become a commercial enterprise right away? Did you advertise? How did you kind of build that business up?
Became commercial right away. So through our contacts and what we had hauled on the farm, we kind of just continued that, branched out in other areas. We really didn't do any outside selling, or it was pretty much just word of mouth as we, haul for one company, then another would call us, and
Right.
It's kind of developed that way over the years. Yeah. I've done some cold calling, especially early. We converted. We were hoppers and convertibles back then. We kind of transitioned to flatbeds. So when we went into the flatbeds, I did a lot of cold calling and ended up couple different manufacturers that I'd called several times would all of a sudden call us and say, hey, our yearly bid's up. You guys still interested? You can bid. Yeah. So I would bid those, and we kind of got into a couple good companies that really got us rolling.
And did you buy vehicles? Did you lease vehicles? How did you kind of expand the fleet?
Originally, we would lease trailers, buy tractors, and just kind of expanded, kept most of the money in the business and just expanded as quickly as we could. Considering my father's bankruptcy, we were probably a little more conservative to make sure we were good.
Solvent,
low debt, and just kind of grew from then. I think we started with about 6 units, then went to 10, and then 17, and we've just kind of grown to, we're around 110 right now.
Got it. That was about 35 years ago, I think.
Right.
When things got started. Yeah. Awesome. And how many employees today?
About 145.
Wow. And what territory do you cover? Are you nationwide? Are you mostly Midwest?
Pretty much nationwide. We did do some Canada and Mexico. We've kind of backed away from that now, but it's pretty much just 48 states. We don't do a lot in the Northeast. We're more Midwest, Southeast, and West Coast. But
do you remember the first time you started managing people, Scott?
Yeah, truck drivers. My job with the trucking was sales and dispatch. So when we were smaller, I would kind of do both and line up the loads, talk to the drivers, give them their information. Everything was paper back then and phone calls.
Sure.
So
were they independent contractors, or did you actually hire them?
Actually, our drivers, but I'm a 21, 22-year-old kid, and they're 40.
They're in their
50.
40s. Yeah.
So sometimes there's a lack of respect, but I learned to kind of how to
roll with it.
Yeah. just, yeah.
What were some of the early lessons that you take away from those years?
Probably being nicer to people, and you get more with honey than with
vinegar. Yeah.
Yes. Working with people, and it's changed over the years. I think back then you told the driver, this is your load,
right?
Go do it. Now it's kind of, you give them their load. Well, no, I don't want to do that. So you kind of have to be a little more work with people, and hey, here's 3 or 4 different loads. Which one do you prefer? And so it's the business has changed a lot.
That's interesting. Yeah. Do they not want to do it because of where they have to go, perchance, or the number of days they're away?
Might be where they have to go. Might be the type of product they don't happen to like. Maybe it's a shipper that they don't like because they're slow to load, or they had a past problem there, or they want to get to a certain area. It's almost like you're a travel agent with a trucking business now. Instead of doing business, you're putting the driver where he wants to be on the right day. So.
Right. Now, do you still do that traffic management job? Is that still part of your responsibilities?
I'm kind of oversee that department. Okay. So if someone's on vacation, I fill in, but the day-to-day, I don't. I'm more the rate bids are usually yearly, and a lot of quoting, but more just overseeing those guys and make sure they're doing their job, but then just fill in vacations.
And you're in partnership with your brother on that, or are there two brothers?
Two brothers.
Two brothers.
Older brother Rod and a younger brother Todd. And
the 3 of you guys are involved.
And Dad retired around 2000, 2001, 2002, somewhere in there.
Got it. And is Dad still with us?
He is. Yep.
Good. But not involved in the business.
No. He kind of got the farming itch. So as things started to go better, he bought some farmland. He rents that back to my brother-in-law, and he kind of help out with harvest, things like that. Now that he's in his 80s now, so he's kind of slowed down on that. But he had a good 20 years of kind of getting back into the farming a little bit and scratching that itch.
Yeah. Good for him. And your brothers, are they both believers?
Both believers. Yeah, my whole immediate family became Christians.
How does faith kind of play out in the Hinz Trucking Company? Do you consider yourself a faith-based business? I know you're a C12 member, as I am, but is that an essential part of kind of who you stand for, or who Hinz Trucking stands for in their core values?
It is, and probably the same with the Jimmy John's business until the last 2 years. We tried to conduct ourselves as how Jesus would want us to, but we really didn't go out of our way to witness or make it a big part of our businesses. Definitely some separation there. And I think in the last 2 years, I've really kind of changed on that. I've been much more outspoken. About a year and a half ago, I shared my faith at a couple Jimmy John ops meetings, which was the first time I had really done that with employees. And since then, it's been a bigger part of what we do, and trying to either expand our employees' faith or bring more to Christ.
And a marketplace ministry. Now, let's talk a little bit about Jimmy John's. You've been doing that about 12 years, right? So did you buy a franchise? Is that how you kind of got involved with that? It sounds like your son's involved in that track.
Yes. We had my brothers and I, same brothers in the trucking business, got into hotels. And my wife and son were both involved with that, working in the hotels. And then my son decided he'd like to go do something on his own and not, have the whole family dynamic to work around. So he started looking at franchises, kind of the same model as the hotels. We were franchised, and looked at Jimmy John's, and he had me look at it, and I said, I think it looks pretty good. So he drove out to Champaign, Illinois, their headquarters, got approved to be a franchisee, and I kind of started that process. And then it was probably 30, 60 days later, my wife said, well, maybe I should do a franchise too, and I could eventually get out of the family business in the hotels, and we could kind of help each other if we each had one. So we went out to Champaign, got approved for a franchise, and that kind of started. Matthew opened his in May of '08, and Sandra opened hers in June of '08, and it went well. And so we just kind of kept going, and I kept getting more and more sucked into the business.
It sounds like it, right? Hard not to when the wife and the son are involved. Right?
Yeah. And as they grew.
And how many units do you folks have today?
45 units today.
Wow. Congratulations. And do they all operate under one umbrella? You'd mentioned that Matthew and your wife had each one. Now, are they all co-owned or?
Matthew and Sandra own them together as umbrella company, a management company that has all the employees, and then each individual store is a separate entity. But
Right. Cool. And are you involved in the management of that day to day or in some of the leadership there?
Yeah, more of the as the chief operating officer, I oversee the store operations. So we've got area managers that oversee about 5 restaurants each. We have a regional manager in Kansas City that there's 32 units there. So he has 8 areas underneath him. So he kind of runs that market, but I'm just kind of overseeing the whole thing and interpreting the data and giving direction and see a problem, work with the leases, the financing, things like that. So kind of more of an upper level view, but not in the stores day to day.
Right. Well, you got 2 very different businesses that you're involved with. I mean, I can't think of 2 that are probably more different. How has your leadership kind of style evolved over time to deal with those 2 different types of businesses?
I've had to learn to delegate.
Yeah.
I think with the trucking as we grew, I was dispatching sales, and it got to the point, I think we got around 30 power units, and I can't do both. So I hired a guy he would talk to the drivers. I would do the load planning and deal with the customers. And then that kind of continued to more people. And then the next step was I got out of the day to day and just oversaw those people. That letting go was difficult. And same with Jimmy John's, started out a little more hands-on, and then as time went on, the bigger you get, it was kind of a delegate by force because you didn't have enough time to do everything. So
how do you share with us a little bit of your thoughts about kind of building a company culture? Are you pretty much involved in that in both the businesses?
More so on the Jimmy John side, probably. The trucking, I have my sales and dispatch, so there you can, but it's a little tougher.
Is your brother the CEO of that business?
One brother's president. We've always kind of not been titled there.
Right.
We kind of, we've kind of always been. We really don't do anything unless all 3 of us agree to it. So that, at times we've had to label someone, but we're all equal partners and kind of all talk about things, and it's worked well that way. We each have our separate area of responsibility, so we've kind of kept out of each other's hair.
Yeah, right. And then more so with Jimmy John's, in terms of the culture. Yeah. How would you describe the culture there?
Jimmy John's, very hands-on compared to other restaurants. The general manager's on the line working, doing everything that maybe other restaurant managers do not do. They have more of a bird's eye view, but Jimmy John's is a little unique in that the general manager's right in there working with his people, and that kind of carries through to all levels. Most of our area managers are regional and in Kansas City started as maybe drivers in shop and worked their way up. So they know how to work.
Right.
And then it's just always kind of been an environment of we all needed to help each other. And one restaurant gets low on bread. Another restaurant has to help them. One restaurant has 3 or 4 employees call in sick or whatever. Maybe you need some employees from another one next door. So there's a lot of sharing and working together and helping each other. And, I think that's really carried through.
Yeah.
And I think the culture, Jimmy John, the founder of Jimmy John's, has always said, culture is not for sale. You can't buy it.
Right.
You got to build it. And, I've kind of carried that through. And I mean, it really does filter down from the top. So how you are and how you treat people filters all the way down. And that's
how many employees at Jimmy John's in your franchise?
We're currently around, we were around 880 before the virus. We have probably laid off around 30%, 35% of our part-time people, and just trying to survive now. So,
yeah. Do you get involved in the hiring of those folks? Is that something you've done in the past?
I've done it in the past, but not too much now. The only thing I'm really involved with hiring would be a director of marketing, or if we're going to take somebody from a general manager position in a restaurant to an area manager or above, then I'll be involved with that decision.
What do you look for when you're making bets on the people you're going to invest in and hire?
Desire, the want to, willingness to do whatever it takes, someone who serves their team, treats their team well. I take those things over talent any day of the week, especially in the Jimmy John business, is just being able to get along with people, treat people well is so important.
Yeah, that customer service aspect is awesome. And how do you interview and hire? Do you do a lot of face-to-face interviews when you're involved in it? Do you do more on the phone? What's that look like in the past?
We're usually building people from within. So we'll typically, they've probably been on the job 2 or 3 years. So we kind of have an ongoing job interview and know what we have, but we'll do an interview with the top 3 or 4 candidates and just look for any red flags with how a change of duty is going to affect them, what they see as the job and how that will change for them.
If you only had about 5 minutes to interview someone, Scott, what would you ask them? What do you try to key in on?
Core beliefs as a person, kind of what their worldview, how they see themselves in relation to their fellow man, what they believe makes a person a good manager of people, and then kind of what their experience is.
Well, Scott, you've been very, very generous with your time. I'm so grateful for that. We do ask one last question, and that's kind of what career and life advice would you give to someone who, has their eyes on the corner office, potentially maybe they're in a family business and they want to grow one or perhaps join one at some point in time. What are the important things for them to do now if that's something they want to do in the future?
I think be a servant leader is number one, and just putting God first in your life. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, then all these things will be added unto you. In Matthew 6:33, and whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Colossians. I think if you really focus on that servant leadership and putting God first, the rest of it really does take care of itself. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into it, working hard and all that, but ultimately, if you're doing those 3 things, you're going to be very successful.
Well, Scott Hinz, partner of Hinz Trucking, a 35-year-old company that does nationwide long-haul hauling, and Chief Operating Officer of HINZJJ LLC, Jimmy John's franchisee in Kansas. Thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.